Why did they always laugh at the tattoo before they ever looked at her face? It started the same way every time. A glance, a smirk, someone nudging someone else. The raven inked across her collarbone peeked out just enough beneath the gray hoodie to invite judgment, and judgment came fast at Titan Base. Always did. Out here in the Nevada desert, where the air was dry and secrets were buried deeper than bodies, people learned to categorize quickly. Loud meant capable. Quiet meant invisible. Raven Winters had learned that lesson early. She sat alone at the briefing table, back straight, hands folded, eyes forward. No one asked her opinion. No one ever did. She was a communications tech, signal corps, useful but forgettable. The kind of soldier you didn't remember after roll call, and that was fine. Invisibility was easier than being seen. Except the tattoo ruined that. They laughed because it looked dramatic. A raven in flight, wings spread wide, black ink detailed enough to feel alive. Someone once joked she probably got it during spring break. Someone else said it looked like a phase. She never corrected them, never explained. She just pulled her hood higher and went back to work. What they didn't know was that the raven wasn't decoration. It was a marker. Titan Base didn't feel like a place where legends lived. 47 square miles of scrubland, razor wire, concrete, servers humming day and night in climate-controlled rooms. It was where quiet work happened. Classified work. The kind that didn't come with parades. That suited Raven just fine. She understood machines better than people. Signals behaved. Code followed rules. People didn't. People laughed at what they didn't understand. And Raven had learned a long time ago that explaining yourself rarely changed anything. So when the Tier 1 operators arrived without warning, she barely looked up. 6 of them moved through the base like gravity bent around them. No patches, no names, just presence. The kind that made officers step aside without being told. Raven stayed at her workstation, eyes on the encryption feeds, fingers hovering over keys. Then the room went quiet. She felt it before she saw it, that pressure behind the neck, someone watching too closely. When she finally glanced up, one of them stood frozen in the doorway, older than the rest, scar along his jaw, eyes that didn't look hard, just tired, ancient. He was staring at her collarbone, at the edge of the raven's wing. His face drained of color. "Turn around," he said. The command wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Raven obeyed. "Pull back your hood." For half a second she hesitated. Not fear, calculation. Then she lifted it. The raven was fully visible now. Wings spread. Beneath it, tiny coordinates etched so small most people would never notice. The man did something no one else in the room had ever seen. He came to full attention. And he saluted. The room stopped breathing. Raven stood slowly and returned it, her movement precise, practiced, automatic. Something shifted in the air, not authority, not fear. Recognition. "You were at Blackthorn," he whispered. Every operator behind him stiffened. Blackthorn wasn't a place. It was a ghost. A classified operation so deep it officially never existed. 28 operatives went in. 28 names on the casualty list. No survivors. Except Raven Winters was standing right there. She didn't confirm it, she didn't deny it, she didn't need to. The commander lowered his hand like it weighed 1,000 pounds. They left soon after, but secrets don't stay contained once they're seen. And Raven knew the moment he saluted her that invisibility was over. Why did it feel heavier to be noticed than to be mocked? The whispers spread faster than dust in desert wind. Not facts, fragments, speculation, fear, respect twisted with uncertainty. People stopped joking. That almost felt worse. Raven moved the same way she always had. Hood up, head down, work flawless. But now eyes followed her. Conversations died when she passed. She hadn't changed, the world around her had. 3 nights later, Commander Harrington found her alone in the communications tower. He brought coffee. That alone felt strange. "I won't ask what happened," he said quietly, "or why you're here, but I need you to know something." She didn't look at him. "We were supposed to die there," he continued. "Blackthorn wasn't designed for survivors, but you made decisions that saved others. That matters." The word settled somewhere deep. He stood to leave, paused once. "Welcome back to the world, Ember." That name hadn't been spoken aloud in years. Later in the briefing room, someone finally pushed too hard. "What makes you so special?" a major demanded. "A tattoo and a story." Raven stood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't accuse, didn't posture. She told them about Captain Reeves, about bullets and blood and a man who stayed standing so others could escape. She told them she'd stepped over his body to survive. "The Raven isn't decoration," she said. "It's a memorial." No one laughed after that. What happens when truth finally catches up to the people who dismissed it? Colonel Drake read the documents in silence, page by page, his face aged with every paragraph. When he finished, he stood and saluted her. Not because of rank, because of weight. Phones rang that night, Pentagon lines, classified confirmations. By morning, Titan Base knew one thing for certain. Raven Winters was not what she seemed. She didn't ask for protection. It arrived anyway. She didn't ask for respect. It came quietly, awkwardly, imperfectly. And then the base was attacked. 3:47 hours, explosions, alarms, chaos. Raven was already moving. Two intruders reached the communications tower. They never made it inside. The fight lasted seconds, precise, final, silent. When it was over, the base still stood because one woman had never stopped being who she was, even while pretending to be something smaller. Why does recognition always come after the cost is paid? The after-action report was brief, clinical. Threat neutralized, systems intact. But everyone knew. Titan Base didn't lose power that morning, didn't lose comms, didn't lose lives. Because Raven Winters stood her ground. Her transfer orders came quietly. No ceremony, no speeches. Just a helicopter lifting into the desert sky. People saluted as it rose, not because they were told to. Because they understood now. What does strength look like when it doesn't need applause? At Special Operations Command, Raven chose the shadows again. No medals on display, no headlines. Just work, quiet, precise, necessary. She advised missions that never made the news, saved lives no one would ever count. Her tattoo stayed hidden most days. Not because of shame. Because dignity doesn't need explanation. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones you never notice. Sometimes the loudest power is restraint. And sometimes the ones who survive don't do so to be celebrated, but to carry the weight forward quietly, faithfully, until the work is done. The Raven doesn't announce itself when it flies. It simply does. Why did the silence feel louder than the laughter ever had? The moment the operators left the communications tower, Titan Base didn't return to normal. It couldn't. Silence followed them down the corridors like a pressure change before a storm. Raven stayed seated at her workstation long after their footsteps faded, fingers hovering above the keyboard, posture perfect, breath measured. Anyone watching the security feeds would have thought nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. She had spent 14 months learning how to be small, how to take up as little space as possible, how to let insults slide remind her that invisibility was safer than recognition. And now, in less than 60 seconds, a single salute had dismantled that careful armor. They knew. Not everyone, not yet, but one man with authority and scars older than her career knew exactly what the Raven meant, and knowledge, once seen, didn't stay contained. Raven pulled her hood back up, covering the tattoo with a practiced motion. The fabric felt heavier than usual, not because it weighed more, but because hiding now felt different. Before, the hood had been protection. Now it felt like a question. She forced herself to focus on the monitors, encryption cycles, satellite uplinks, signal integrity. The machines didn't care who she was. They responded only to precision. That helped. It grounded her. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. Her body stayed still, but her mind replayed the commander's reaction again and again. The way his breath had caught, the way his hand had risen without hesitation, the way his voice had changed when he said the name. Blackthorn. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. Back then the word had meant purpose, direction, a mission so classified that it erased you before you ever stepped onto the transport. No names, no ranks, just call signs and trust. Blackthorn had taken everything from her and given her nothing she could talk about. Now it had followed her here. Footsteps echoed outside the tower, different this time, multiple, purposeful. Raven didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She pulled up the internal security feeds instead. 5 operators, Commander Harrington in the lead, straight toward Colonel Drake's office. So that's how it would happen. She felt no panic, no rush of fear, just a quiet certainty. This was the moment she'd always known would come eventually. You could only bury the truth for so long before it pushed back to the surface. She leaned back slightly, letting the chair support her weight. For the first time since arriving at Titan Base, she allowed herself to feel tired. Not physically, emotionally. Carrying a secret wasn't heavy because of what it was. It was heavy because of what it prevented you from becoming. She had stayed quiet not because she lacked strength, but because she didn't trust what would happen if people knew. Respect could turn into expectation. Expectation could turn into demand. And Raven wasn't sure she was ready to be needed again. The silence stretched. Then the base changed. Not with alarms, not with announcements, but with a shift in behavior so subtle most people couldn't name it. Doors opened faster. Conversations lowered when she passed. The casual mockery disappeared overnight, replaced by something harder to manage. Uncertainty. She noticed it in the mess hall first. A corporal who used to joke loudly fell silent when she entered. A lieutenant who'd never acknowledged her presence suddenly nodded too quickly, as if correcting a mistake he didn't fully understand. They were trying to place her. That was worse than laughter. Rumors grew in the absence of facts. Some said she was intelligence. Others whispered special operations. One ridiculous theory suggested she was planted there to monitor the base from within. Raven heard them all without reacting. Letting people speculate was safer than confirming anything. Fear filled the gaps truth left behind. Late that night, the communications tower was quiet again. Skeleton crew, low light. The desert outside stretched endless and indifferent beyond the reinforced glass. That's when Harrington returned. He didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He just stood there for a moment, holding 2 cups of coffee like an offering that felt almost human. "Thought you could use this," he said. Raven accepted it without comment. The heat seeped into her palms. She didn't drink, just held it. "I won't ask," Harrington said, settling into a chair across from her. "Why you're here, why you let people talk, why you kept working as a tech when you didn't have to." She stared out at the desert. The night sky held no answers. "But I need you to hear this," he continued. "We weren't supposed to come back from Blackthorn, none of us. That op was designed to end quietly, permanently." His voice didn't shake. That scared her more. "You made decisions under pressure that kept others alive," he said, "including me. You don't owe anyone here an explanation, but you also don't deserve mockery." He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said, softer now, "you don't have to be invisible anymore." Raven didn't answer. She watched him go and wondered if he understood what he just offered her. Visibility wasn't freedom, it was exposure. It meant expectations, questions, and eventually another mission. The next morning, the tension finally broke. Not gently. The briefing room was packed, standing room only. Raven took her usual seat in the third row, clipboard on her lap, posture unchanged. She could feel the attention pressing in from all sides. Master Sergeant Caldwell didn't bother hiding his skepticism. "There she is," he said loudly, "the mystery." A few nervous chuckles followed, not laughter, testing, probing. Major Prescott stepped forward, curiosity sharpened into challenge. "I'd like to know why we're all pretending a tattoo makes someone special." The room held its breath. Raven stayed seated. "Stories are easy," Prescott continued. "Clearance rumors, ghost operations. Anyone can let whispers grow if they don't deny them." Caldwell smirked. "If you were really something, you wouldn't be hiding." That word landed harder than any insult before it. "Hiding." Raven stood. The room stilled. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare, she didn't threaten. She simply spoke. She spoke of a compound that burned, of gunfire that never stopped, of a captain who stayed upright long after he should have fallen. She spoke with the calm precision of someone who had already made peace with the memory. "The Raven isn't decoration," she said. "It marks where someone else gave everything so I could leave." She didn't wait for permission to leave. No one stopped her. After that, things moved quickly. Colonel Drake read the documents with hands that shook despite decades of command. Phones rang. Clearances were verified. Protocols rewritten. By nightfall, Titan Base knew one undeniable truth. Raven Winters had never been small. She had just chosen silence. And silence, she realized, was no longer an option. Not anymore. Why did respect arrive only after fear took its place? By the time the sun dipped behind the Nevada mountains, Titan Base no longer felt like the place Raven Winters had known for 14 months. The corridors were the same. The concrete still smelled of dust and disinfectant. The radios still crackled with routine traffic. But the people moved differently now, more carefully, more aware, like they were sharing space with something they didn't fully understand. Raven noticed it in the smallest details. The way a door opened before she reached it. The way conversations thinned out instead of cutting off abruptly. The way eyes followed her not with mockery anymore, but calculation. She didn't enjoy it. Respect built on mystery was unstable. It shifted too quickly into fear, and fear made people unpredictable. Raven had spent years learning how to survive unpredictability, but she'd also learned what it cost. She returned to the communications tower that evening like nothing had changed. Same chair, same monitors, same hum of servers that never slept. She logged her reports with the same clinical precision she always had. But now, security personnel stood at the base of the stairs. "Ma'am," one of them said, saluting. The word hit her harder than any insult ever had. She nodded once and continued up the steps. Inside the tower, she sat down slowly, feeling the space around her differently. It wasn't larger. If anything, it felt tighter, as if the walls were listening now, as if the base itself had become aware of her presence. She didn't want this. That was the truth she hadn't admitted out loud yet. She hadn't stayed quiet because she lacked confidence. She stayed quiet because noise attracted attention, and attention attracted expectation. And expectation always ended with someone asking you to give more than you had left. Blackthorn had taken nearly everything. Sleep came in fragments that night. Short, sharp bursts interrupted by memories she couldn't shut off. She dreamed of boots crunching gravel, of radios failing, of Reeves turning back when he should have run. She woke before dawn, heart steady, breath controlled. Training never left you. It only went dormant. At 3:47 hours, the base shook. At first, the sound didn't register as danger. It was low, distant, almost like thunder. Raven was already sitting up when the second vibration hit, sharper this time. Alarms followed immediately, cutting through the night with violent urgency. She was moving before conscious thought caught up. Uniform boots terminal. By the time she reached the communications tower, emergency lights were already strobing across the base. Radios screamed overlapping commands. Someone shouted about the eastern perimeter. Someone else called for medical teams. Raven slid into her chair and pulled up the feeds. The image resolved instantly. Smoke rising near the eastern grid, structural damage, heat signatures where there shouldn't be any. This wasn't an accident. Her hands moved faster now, instinct overriding hesitation. She isolated incoming signals, filtering civilian noise, locking the base into hardened military-only channels. "Colonel Drake," she said into the secure line, voice level, "we have a coordinated attack." Silence, then Drake's voice steady but sharpened. "Assessment." "Initial blast external," Raven replied. "Secondary detonation near fuel storage. Pattern suggests drone strike." She paused, eyes scanning the radar overlays. "Sir," she continued, "radar shows no inbound contacts. Stealth profile, this was planned." 3 seconds passed. "Ground movement," she added. "South checkpoint, 4 operators, highly trained, not local." Drake exhaled slowly. "Targets." "They're splitting," Raven said. 2 heading for power distribution, 2 for communications." The implications landed simultaneously. If they lost power in comms, Titan Base would go blind. "Time?" Drake asked. 90 seconds, Raven said. Another pause, this one heavier. "Can you hold them?" Drake asked quietly. Raven didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." She disconnected the line and stood. The weapons cache was secured behind a panel most personnel didn't even know existed. She opened it with practiced efficiency, retrieving a compact rifle and magazines she'd hoped never to touch again. Her breathing slowed. Her thoughts narrowed. This was familiar. She moved to the reinforced glass overlooking the external stairwell. The night outside was alive with motion now, floodlights snapping on, soldiers scrambling, chaos spreading. But the 2 figures ascending the stairs moved differently. Controlled, silent, professional. She waited. The first operator reached the top. 1 shot. He fell without a sound. The second reacted instantly, returning fire. Glass exploded inward. Raven was already gone, moving laterally, repositioning behind structural support. She knew this tower better than anyone. She'd memorized every angle during months of quiet work. The operator advanced cautiously, clearing corners, unaware of the crawlspace above him. That hesitation cost him everything. The engagement was over in seconds. When Raven keyed the comms again, her voice hadn't changed. "Tower secure," she said, 2 down. The base survived because someone who'd learned how to be invisible knew exactly when not to be. The aftermath was strange. Too quiet. Investigators arrived. Questions followed. Reports were written in language stripped of emotion. The official version would never include how close the base had come to catastrophe. But word spread anyway. A private had stopped the attack. Alone. People didn't know what to do with that. Some reacted with awe, others with discomfort, a few with shame. Raven didn't linger long enough to see which emotion won. 3 days later, her transfer orders arrived. Effective immediately. She packed lightly, she always had. There were no souvenirs worth carrying. The morning she left, soldiers stood along the perimeter without being told. No ceremony, no speeches, just quiet salutes as the transport lifted into the sky. Raven looked out the window as Titan Base shrank beneath her. She felt no triumph, only resolve. She hadn't sought recognition. She hadn't demanded respect. She'd simply done what needed to be done when it mattered. And she knew now, the hardest part of survival wasn't staying alive. It was choosing what to do with the life you were left with. What happens after the moment that defines you finally passes. The helicopter ride away from Titan Base was quiet. No one spoke over the headset. No one needed to. Raven sat strapped in, hands resting on her thighs, eyes fixed on the shrinking geometry of concrete and desert below. 14 months of invisibility reduced to coordinates and memory. She didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because she had learned the cost of lingering. The past was heavy. You carried it or it carried you. Blackthorn had taught her that lesson in blood. By the time the aircraft leveled out, Raven had already shifted forward in her mind. That was how she survived, not by erasing what came before, but by refusing to let it slow her down. Florida felt unreal after Nevada. Humidity pressed against her skin the moment she stepped off the transport. Green replaced brown, water replaced dust, and the compound that housed Special Operations Command hummed with a different kind of energy, not loud, not theatrical, but constant, purposeful. This was where the quiet decisions were made. No one greeted her with ceremony. No applause, no speeches. Just paperwork, secure checkpoints, biometric scans, and clearance confirmations layered so deep they felt like a test of patience more than identity. She passed everyone without comment. For the first week, she was processed like an anomaly. Files reopened. Psychological evaluations reviewed. Blackthorn documents accessed by people who hadn't spoken that name aloud in years. Raven answered questions precisely, never volunteering more than was required. She knew what they were looking for. Cracks. They didn't find any. That worried some of them. On the 8th day, General Whitmore summoned her. His office was understated. No grand displays, no dramatic lighting, just a man who had spent a lifetime deciding which risks were acceptable and which lives were worth spending. "Sit," he said. Raven did. "I've read your entire file," Whitmore said without preamble. "Every version of it. The one they archived, the one they buried, and the one Captain Reeves wrote with his last functioning hand." Something tightened in her chest, but she didn't show it. "He said you were the reason anyone walked out of that compound," Whitmore continued. "He said you made decisions under fire that went against protocol and saved lives." Raven stared at the wall behind him. "After Blackthorn," Whitmore said, "you were listed as KIA for a reason, not to erase you, to protect you. Operators who survive catastrophic failures often don't survive what comes next." She understood. Survival guilt was quieter than grief, but far more corrosive. "You were placed at Titan Base to recover," Whitmore said. "Low stress, low visibility, no pressure." He studied her carefully. "Do you feel recovered?" The question wasn't clinical, it was personal. Raven thought of the alarms, the rifle in her hands, the calm that had settled over her during the attack. "Yes," she said. Whitmore nodded once. "Good," he replied, "because I observed what you did at Titan, and that wasn't a wounded operator reacting out of habit. That was someone fully present." He slid a document across the desk. "Your Blackthorn clearance is reinstated, effective immediately." Raven didn't reach for it yet. "This doesn't mean deployment," Whitmore added. "Not unless you want it. You've earned the right to choose." That was new. For years, her life had been dictated by necessity, by survival, by orders that didn't care how much they cost. "What are my options?" she asked. Whitmore leaned back. "Command track," he said. "You lead teams, you make calls in the field, visibility, authority." He paused. "Or you stay in support operations, advisory role, no spotlight, no public recognition, but influence where it matters." Raven knew her answer before he finished speaking. "I'll stay in the shadows," she said. Whitmore smiled faintly, not amused, relieved. "I thought you might," he said. "People who crave power rarely deserve it. People who avoid it usually understand its cost." He handed her the document. "Welcome back," he said quietly. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. Raven sat in briefing rooms where names were redacted and maps were incomplete by design. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, rooms went still. Not because of rank, because she saw patterns others missed. She questioned extraction routes that looked clean on paper but failed under pressure. She flagged assumptions that relied too heavily on luck. She identified moments where hesitation would cost lives. At first, commanders bristled. Then they listened. Then they adjusted. Operations improved. Casualty projections dropped. No one announced it. No one needed to. Her reputation spread the way truth always did, quietly, through results. She didn't wear her tattoo openly at SOCOM, not out of fear, out of respect. It wasn't a symbol for others. It was a reminder for herself. Some nights she stayed late, reviewing plans that would never be acknowledged publicly. Other nights she left early, walking alone near the water, letting the sound of waves replace the echo of gunfire in her head. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. Months passed. One evening, a message appeared on her secure terminal. From HARRNGTON. Subject still flying. The body was brief. The Raven doesn't announce itself when it moves. But everyone who understands the sky knows it's there. Raven closed the message and deleted it. She didn't smile, but she slept better that night. 2 years later, the message came that drew her back to Nevada. Colonel Drake was retiring. He requested her presence. She didn't hesitate. Titan Base looked different from the air, expanded, reinforced, smarter. The scars of the attack had been erased physically but not culturally. The base carried itself differently now, more alert, more disciplined. As she walked the corridors, soldiers straightened instinctively, not stiff, not afraid, just aware. She wasn't a rumor anymore. She was history. Drake greeted her personally. "You changed this place," he said simply. "I stopped something once," Raven replied. "Others did the work after." He nodded. That answer mattered to him. That night, in a small gathering of people who knew the truth, Drake spoke without formality. "She arrived here invisible," he said, "not because she lacked presence, but because she chose restraint. When it mattered, she acted. That's the kind of strength you don't see coming." No applause followed. Just understanding. When Raven left Titan Base for the final time, she walked past the communications tower once more. The glass was new, the equipment updated, the space quiet. Ordinary, and yet forever changed. She touched the fabric near her collarbone, feeling the familiar outline beneath it. The Raven hadn't been mocked there anymore. Not because people were afraid, but because they understood. As the transport lifted into the sky, Raven felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Not relief. Purpose. She had survived when she wasn't meant to. Not to be remembered, but to keep choosing every day what kind of strength the world needed next. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the quiet moments feel heavier than the missions ever had? Raven learned that absence carried its own gravity. After leaving Titan Base for the final time, she returned to her advisory role at SOCOM with a strange sense of displacement. Not loss. She had made peace with loss long ago, but something subtler. When people stopped needing you urgently, the silence could feel like standing at the edge of a runway with no aircraft left to guide in. Her days were still full, briefings, secure calls, redacted maps layered with intent and uncertainty. She shaped outcomes without ever stepping onto the field. Operators came and went, younger every year, carrying confidence that had not yet been tested by consequence. She saw herself in them sometimes, and sometimes she saw the mistakes she'd already paid for. Raven spoke carefully. She never undermined authority, never grandstanded. When she disagreed, she asked questions instead of issuing corrections. What happens if the weather shifts? What happens if comms drop for 40 seconds? What happens if the person you're counting on doesn't come back? At first, some took it as caution, others as doubt. Then a team came back with one operator less than planned. Not dead, alive, because an extraction route Raven had quietly adjusted allowed for a delay no one else had considered. After that, no one dismissed her questions. But influence came with a cost. The more people trusted her judgment, the more often they sought it. The more often they sought it, the harder it became to pretend she was just an observer. She felt it one evening, standing alone in a briefing room long after everyone else had left. The lights dimmed automatically, bathing the maps in muted blue. She stared at a projected coastline and realized she had memorized it without trying. Her body remembered. Muscle memory didn't care how much time passed. It didn't care how many promises you made yourself about staying in the background. When danger appeared on a screen, something inside her leaned forward. She missed the clarity. Not the violence, not the fear. The clarity. In the field, decisions were immediate. Consequences followed quickly. There was no room for second-guessing once you moved. Back here, outcomes stretched over weeks, months. If something went wrong, the question wasn't what you did, it was whether you should have spoken sooner, louder, differently. Guilt thrived in that space. The message came in late, encrypted, high priority. From W. Chaitiamori. Subject request. She read it once, then again. A joint task force was forming. Intelligence suggested a hostile cell had rebuilt near the same region as Blackthorn. Different leadership, different objectives, same terrain, same unforgiving geography. They wanted her. Not as an advisor. On the ground. Raven sat back slowly, letting the chair support her weight. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She hadn't expected this, not because it was impossible, but because she had quietly hoped the world would move on without pulling her back into its sharpest edges. She didn't answer immediately. That night sleep refused to come. Memories stirred, uninvited but familiar. The smell of burned concrete, the weight of a rifle, the sound of Reeves' voice telling her to go when everything in her wanted to stay. She walked outside instead, letting the humid air press against her skin. The ocean stretched dark and endless beyond the fence line. Waves didn't hesitate. They didn't debate their direction. They moved because that was their nature. She wondered if hers had ever truly changed. In the morning, she requested a meeting. Whitmore listened, without interrupting as she spoke. "I won't lead," she said. "I won't command a unit." He nodded. "But I'll deploy," she continued. "Limited role, recon, overwatch, no authority beyond mission necessity." Whitmore studied her carefully. "You understand what this means," he said. "You've rebuilt something here, this risks that." Raven met his gaze. "So did staying silent at Titan," she replied. That answer settled it. Preparation was quieter than it used to be. No bravado, no dramatic speeches, just careful checks and deliberate routines. She trained alone, testing herself not against others but against memory. She was slower. She was also sharper. Experience had stripped away waste. Every movement had purpose. Every breath was measured. The team she joined was competent, young but not reckless. They treated her with respect that bordered on restraint. No one asked about the tattoo. No one tested her. They'd read the files. The insertion went clean. Night swallowed them whole as they moved through terrain that hadn't changed since the last time she'd bled there. Mountains didn't care about history. They just waited. Raven took point for Overwatch, settling into a position that felt almost familiar enough to hurt. She scanned the compound below through her optics, cataloging movement, counting steps, watching patterns repeat. The mission unfolded slowly, too slowly. Her instincts prickled. Something was wrong. She adjusted her angle, tracking a shadow that didn't fit the rhythm, a guard who paused too long, a light that flickered when it shouldn't have. She keyed her mic softly. Hold. The team froze. I'm seeing inconsistencies, she continued. Possible secondary presence. Command hesitated. Time pressed. Can you confirm? The voice asked. Raven watched the shadow move again, just enough. Yes, she said, they're baiting us. The silence that followed was heavy. Then a just approach. The detour cost them 20 minutes. It saved them from an ambush that would have cut the team in half. Later, when the target was secured and extraction confirmed, one of the younger operators glanced at her. How did you know? He asked quietly. Raven didn't answer right away. I've been the one waiting before, she said finally. The one hopping someone would hesitate. Back at the safe zone, as adrenaline faded, something unexpected crept in. Fear. Not of death. Of survival. Because surviving meant carrying this again. The responsibility, the knowledge, the understanding that when you could act, choosing not to became its own kind of failure. That night she sat alone, cleaning her gear with mechanical focus. Her hands didn't shake, but her chest felt tight. She thought of Titan Base, of the laughter, of the salute that changed everything. She realized then that redemption wasn't about erasing the past or proving your worth. It was about accepting that some people were shaped by moments they could never walk away from, only forward through. When Whitmore's follow-up message arrived weeks later, she read it without hesitation. The task force wanted her permanently. She closed the terminal and stood, feeling the familiar weight settle into place. Not because she needed validation, but because there was still work to do. And she had finally accepted the truth she'd been avoiding since Blackthorn. Some people don't survive to rest. They survive to stand watch, quietly, faithfully, so others never have to know how close the darkness came. Why did the ending feel less like closure, and more like a beginning she hadn't planned for? Raven had learned that the last mission never announced itself as the last. It didn't arrive with ceremony or warning. It came quietly, disguised as routine. Another briefing room, another map stripped of names, another objective defined by what must not happen rather than what should. By now, she understood that this was how the world really turned. Not on moments of glory, but on decisions made in rooms with no windows by people who would never be remembered. She was one of them now. The task force had become permanent, not in name but in rhythm. The same faces rotated in and out, some returning changed, others not returning at all. Raven never asked which category was harder to live with. She already knew. Her role was no longer questioned. She moved between planning and execution with a calm that unsettled newcomers. She didn't rush. She didn't dominate the room. She listened, then spoke only when it mattered. And when she did, people listened. Not because of rank, not because of reputation, but because her instincts had proven expensive to ignore. The mission that followed wasn't large. No high-value target with a code name designed to sound impressive. No countdown clock, just intelligence suggesting a weapons transfer near a civilian corridor. The kind of operation that failed quietly and ruined lives in ways no report could measure. Raven volunteered for Overwatch. Not because she needed to be there, but because she trusted herself to know when something felt wrong. The position overlooked a narrow valley where shadows lingered longer than they should. She settled in as the sun dipped, adjusting her optics, noting how the light caught dust in the air. It reminded her of Titan Base at dusk, of how ordinary places could still hold danger if you stopped paying attention. The team below moved carefully, disciplined, focused. For a while, everything aligned. Then it didn't. Raven felt it before she saw it, that familiar tightening in her chest, not fear, recognition. Movement on the ridge to the east, subtle, intentional. She keyed her mic, pause. The team froze. "I've got eyes on potential third party," she said, "not in the brief." Command hesitated. They always did when the data didn't match the plan. "Confirm hostile," the voice said. Raven tracked the figures, watched how they moved, how they waited. "They're armed," she said, "and they're not here for the transfer." Silence stretched. "Then why are they here?" someone asked. Raven answered without looking away. "For us." The decision came fast after that. Adjust, redirect, abort if necessary. The weapons never changed hands. The civilians never knew how close the danger had come. The third party melted away once they realized the advantage was gone. It ended without gunfire. Those were always the best outcomes. Later, as the team regrouped, one of the operators sat beside her. Young, capable, eyes still sharp with adrenaline. "You always seem calm," he said, "even when things shift." Raven considered the question. "I'm not calm," she replied. "I'm practiced." That night, alone in her quarters, the weight finally settled. Not exhaustion, something deeper. She realized she wasn't running from the past anymore. She was carrying it deliberately, choosing where to place its weight so it wouldn't crush anyone else. The message came the next morning. From WCHTMORE. Subject: transition. She already knew what it meant. They met in person. No aides, no files on the table. "You've done enough," Whitmore said, not as a dismissal, as recognition. Raven didn't argue. Her body bore the quiet costs of years spent alert. Old injuries whispered when the weather shifted. Sleep came easier now, but only because she had accepted what it carried with it. "I want you to consider training," Whitmore continued. "Not teaching tactics, teaching judgment." She nodded slowly. "Not everyone survives long enough to pass that on," he added. Raven thought of Reeves, of Harrington, of Titan Base standing in the dark while she held a tower no one knew could fall. "I'll do it," she said. The transition wasn't immediate. It never was. She stayed through one final rotation, watched one more group of operators learn how fragile certainty could be. On her last day in the field, she stood alone at dawn, watching light creep across unfamiliar terrain. She felt no sadness, only gratitude. For the silence, for the work, for the fact that she had been allowed to matter without being consumed. Years later, a young recruit sat across from her in a quiet room far from any battlefield. They asked about the tattoo. Raven didn't hide it. "It's not about what I survived," she said. "It's about what I didn't forget." The recruit nodded, not fully understanding. That was okay. Some lessons weren't meant to be understood all at once. Raven walked the perimeter that evening, listening to the world settle. No alarms, no urgency, just the low hum of systems doing their job. She touched the Raven once, gently. It had never been about proving anything. It had been about remembering who she was when no one was watching. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't announce itself or demand to be seen. Sometimes dignity simply stands the line, quietly, faithfully, so others never have to know how close the darkness came.